Kristian, we're looking forward to your intervention, your perspectives on the science and its connection to policy. And we'll have questions for you and then open the discussion more generally. So please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. So my presentation here is mainly on the scientific aspects of why we need this type of treaty here. So what are the implications of plastics? And I will share my screen. And while I share it, I can just also say that this whole discussion about consensus actually started in Europe where they ended up agreeing not to agree, and they did the same in Paris. So yeah, that's how great that was. Okay, so my name is Kristian Syberg. I'm a head of section at the Department of Science and Environment, Roskilde University. I also play a central role in a big Danish partnership we have on transition towards circular economy. And then, not at least, I'm a proud member of the Scientists Coalition for an Effective Plastic Treaty. I have a background in biology and environmental planning. So my studies are very interdisciplinary and across the areas of science and social science. Today, I'm going to talk most about the understanding of the risk of plastic pollution. So what are the implications of plastic pollutions? And then I'm happy in the discussion to take these considerations into a policy context as well afterwards. So, see if I can. There we go. Okay, so first, very quickly, what is it when we talk about plastic? What are we talking about here? Because this is quite important also to understand the implications of plastic pollution. So this is basically a simple monomer with a backbone of carbon with different kind of atoms on it, depending on the plastic polymer type. And then these type of monomers are interlinked in large chains called polymer types. And these, if you see these different lines here, maybe you can see my arrow here. Yeah, maybe I can even share with a pen, the laser pointer. Woohoo! Can you see my laser pointer?
Yes,
right?
It's exciting.
Okay, so you can see all these black lines here are the polymer chains here, and then the red squares, they represent additives that are into the plastic. Was one of the fantastic things from a material point of view with plastic is that it is very, very easily absorb different kind of additives, and that can give it different properties. So it has these material properties with being lightweight and very strong, and then you can modify the properties of the plastic very, very easily. And if you can see this area here, where the polymers lies almost organized, that's called the crystalline or semi-crystalline areas. And then there are areas here where they are more loosely structured, which is called amorphous areas. And depending on the polymer type, it have a different ratio between these crystalline areas and the more amorphous areas and it's in the more amorphous areas where additive will typically occupy the plastics. And one of the issues with plastic is that a lot of these additives, they are not chemically bound to the plastic, so they are lying sometimes, which we say it's the same as small peas within a bowl of spaghetti. They're just lying in there, not chemically bound, and that means that they can leach out of the plastic very easily. And this is some of the environmental and human health implications are due to this effect here. And I'll get back to that. So if we just say, what are we talking about when we're talking about plastic pollution, some overall terms here. Very briefly, we can separate it very roughly into macroplastics being larger than 5 millimeters in size and microplastic being less than 5 millimeters in size. That's the most simple distinction between these two different type of categories of plastic pollution. We can go more into detail. This is a graph taken from a Gesamt report made for UNEA, where you can see all these different size categories of plastic, all the way down from nanoplastics, which is in the nano size range, same range size as viruses, for example, all the way up to what we can call mega plastics, which is this big lump of expanded polystyrene there, the size of a dog, right? So we have this continuum of sizes of plastic pollution, and if you're a little bit cynical, sometimes you can say that for every size of a creature in the environment, there is a size of plastic that it can interact with and it can harm, as you can see here from this range. Then furthermore, we distinguish between what's called primary microplastics and secondary microplastics. So if you can see here, the primary microplastics, there's two different ways of defining that. You either define it as plastic particles that are made in the size of microplastics. So these pellets here, these are pellets that you have been using for swapping effects in cosmetics, for example, or you can also use, they've also been used when you clean ship hulls and these kind of things. And then there are the secondary microplastic, which is, as you can maybe see some of these fragments here. This is a picture from one of our expeditions to the Mediterranean Sea, where you can see this is larger pieces of plastic that are fragmented into microplastic while it's in the environment. Typically, we have, so some of the regulations that Doris showed before about EU regulations, they target this type of plastics here, whereas what we find in the environment, there is definitely some primary microplastic also shredding from car tires and from clothes and these kind of things. But the majority of plastic pollution is larger pieces of plastic that are then degraded into microplastic and eventually also nanoplastics. So what this figure shows here is the distribution of different plastics in the global ocean based on size. So the reason why I wanted to show you this is because if you start with the first image here, you can see the heat map here is the red and orange colors indicate that there are higher concentrations. So you can see there's the highest concentrations of particles is the smallest particles here. You can see this is from 0.3 millimeters up to 1 millimeter. And the reason why this doesn't go further down than 0.3, that is the net size of the trawls that has typically been used to sample these oceanic plastic pollution. So there are emerging data on the size categories below 0.3 millimeters, but in historical content, a lot of the data is above 0.3 millimeters. And then you can see here in this next graph, there's also a lot of this plastic that is in the category of 1 to almost 5. So this would be what's called microplastic, these two upper diagrams here. And then you can see fewer numbers of plastic particles once you go up in size and even further up in size above 200 millimeters. So this is based on count, so not based on mass, right? Obviously, if you have a big box that ends up in the environment, that would count as one piece, but if you weight it, it will weigh much more than maybe 100 type of microplastics. This is made of count, but it's important because a lot of the interaction with biota and also with humans is based on the size. So there is this inverse relationship that the smaller the particles they are, the more abundant they are. So what are the impacts of different kinds of plastics? So there you can have different type of categories. One is obviously organisms eating plastic, and as I said before, there is a size for every type of organism. So as some of our speakers here some of our participants here today know, even down to the smallest organisms such as copepods, there is a size range where they can eat that. But you will also find plastic particles that is in the size range where whales eat that, for example. So there is, and this is what we see, eating plastic by mistake is something that happens for all animals. And obviously some of the worst case scenarios is, for example, for the Laysan albatross, which lives in the northern Pacific. They have, for example, big colonies at the Midway Islands where there is nothing else but a military base, US military base, and then this big nesting colony of albatrosses. But since they live in one of the accumulation zones there, that is what's popularly called the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, when they go out and search for forage for food in the environment, they pick up plastics by mistake and they feed their young with plastic, and that fill the stomach of the young birds, so they starve to death and never leave the nest. There is a movie of one of my friends made that you can find. I think it's free online on the internet. It's called Albatross, by Chris Jordan, who made this movie. He spent 9 years making this movie, so you can look that up if you're interested. Not a feel-good movie, be warned. Another thing is obviously this type of entanglement or otherwise impaired by the physical presence. This is from a fishing net, sometimes with a little bit of drama. We call these ghost nets because fishing gears that is lost into the environment keep fishing over time and kills a lot of wildlife, like for example sea turtles, which is already endangered species, and this is just an additional threat to these type of organisms. But it can also be other type. It can be organisms that are caught on plastics or entangled in other type of plastics as well. And then if we go down to the very small particles here, this is an image from a paper that was published a few years ago where they looked at internal uptake and translocation of nanoplastics. And this is a fish larvae. And where you can see in image A here, you can see this is a larvae that have not been exposed to plastic. And in B, you can see it is a larvae that have been exposed to plastic. And you can see the development of the eyes. You can see the difference here where you can see it's proper development in A and it's not proper development in image B here. So this is an illustration of the smallest plastic particles, especially nanoplastics, but maybe also some of the smallest microplastic. They can be translocated across biological membranes, and that can cause many different kind of impacts that we don't fully understand yet, but we have more and more evidence come out about these effects as well. So that's sort of the physical part of plastic. Then there is another part of plastic which is equally important, which is the chemical impact of plastic. This is a diagram that I borrowed from a report that the UNEP, so the United Nations Environmental Program, they published in May, where they went over and looked at all the different chemicals that are used in plastics. And they identified 13,000 different chemicals that is used in plastic production today. Of these 13,000, 7,000 have been analyzed. So approximately half of them we know something about. The other half we don't know anything about. And out of the 7,000 that have been analyzed, 3,200 has a potential concern, so potential harmful effect, right? So half of the chemicals that we know something about in plastic has potential negative impact either on the environment or human health, and then half of them we don't even know what's happening there. So this is a big issue, which we also start to talk into the policy context. This whole disclosure of what's actually in plastic is a big concern. If you go a little bit further into a look, what are these type of chemicals of concern? So the 3,200 that we do know something about, these are some of the areas. Flame retardant, which is a big area, obviously used in many different kind of products, has been known to have both carcinogenic and endocrine disrupting effect. Bisphenols is a very old group, but we also know endocrine disruptors. We have the PFAS that everybody is talking about now, right? We have known that for many years. This is a big group of chemicals with very problematic properties. Sometimes they are called forever chemicals because the way they are structured with the covalent bonding between the fluoride and the carbon atom is actually the strongest covalent bond that you find in the environment or in nature. Also, these chemicals are very difficult to break down by any kind of bacteria or other biological activities. Other type of chemicals, then this group here I also just want to highlight what's called NIAS, so non-intentionally added substances. So when you produce plastics, depending on where you are, depending on the process, because plastics very much act as a sponge for chemicals, it absorbs different kind of chemicals as well, depending on the specific procedures. And this procedure and what is produced. So these are called NIAS, and they actually pose a big problem, and it's very difficult to understand what are the different NIASs because it depends on the specific production line there. Okay, so a big area here with different chemicals of concern. If you look at some of the impacts of these different chemicals, so we talked about these flame retardants, plasticizers, which you probably heard about, the phthalates as well. These are endocrine disrupting chemicals. We have other kind of endocrine phytoestrogens, is something that is obviously found in the environment, but also have these estrogenic, mimicking estrogenic hormones. So basically, our development of our body and a lot of the processes we have are governed by hormones, so different kind of endocrine procedures here, and then these type of chemicals. So these hormones, they are a little bit like building blocks. So I'm from Denmark, so sometimes I use the case of Lego bricks. You know, Lego bricks, right? So they have to fit together. So the hormone have to fit physically into the receptor side of a cell, and then it sends a signal about a certain procedure, for example. So if it's an estrogen hormone that binds to a receptor for an estrogen, it tells the cell to be a female cell here. So if you get an over exposure to these type of chemicals, and you're, for example, a boy that are being developed in the womb of your mother, you will have too many signals to have female development, and that will impact your ability to reproduce in the future. It will increase your risk of testicular cancer, other type of cancers, these kind of different type of effects. We see the same with females, where in the 1960s, the most common form of breast cancer is what's called estrogen-mediated breast cancer. 1 out of 20 women had that in the 60s, and today it's 1 out of 8. So we see a drastically increase in this type of estrogenly or endocrine disrupting mediated impacts on humans. And obviously cancer, as we talked a little bit about there, a lot of different kind of chemicals that we find that are problematic causes cancer. And so these are the things that we worry most about from a human health perspective. We do not worry too much about whether animals get cancer, for example, a fish, but we do worry about us eating chemicals that causes cancer maybe in that fish here. So this whole area of chemicals in plastic historically has been a very, very big area. We know all the way back to several decades back. We know that plastic chemicals are some of the worst, and it's a big topic also in the current negotiations on the plastic treaty, how to address these type of chemicals, or whether to address them or not, because some stakeholders will say chemicals in plastic is not a problem at all. If we look at the environmental implications, then we have a lot of different type of effects of chemicals, and I'm not going to all of them, but one thing that is important to remember is that a lot of the chemicals that pose the biggest problem that we are most concerned about are very persistent, so they break down very slowly, like the PFAS, for example. They tend to bind into fatty tissues, so they accumulate in organisms, and they tend to biomagnify, so they also concentrate up through the food chain. And the final consumer in the food chain is large predators like this shark here, but also humans here, for example. And we have seen something like some of these chemicals of concern that have this tendency to accumulate in fatty tissues. If we see people living in, for example, Arctic, in Greenland, and these areas where they do not necessarily consume a lot of product containing these type of chemicals, they have very high concentration of these chemicals in their blood, in their tissue, because it concentrates in the food chain, and they eat, for example, seals, which has living high up in the food chain and has a lot of fatty tissues as well. Okay, that was basically what I had to talk about all the amazing aspects of death and destruction from plastics here. So happy to take any kind of questions and also discuss about impacts, and also relate this to policy content and the plastic treaty. So I'll stop sharing here.